Before we go on, we should also talk a little bit about that MTV theme song.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. The theme song was written by Jonathan Elias, who went on, he was a big advertising writer. And, the guitars, da, 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 I will have that in my brain forever. And it was so kind of cool to put that along with the iconic, reverent astronaut footage. And so that's just one of those things that, right away said, whoa, what's this? Because we were all used to seeing, this moonwalks, like, so, like, oh, the TV gets wheeled into the classroom and we're going to watch the astronauts. And it was really, something that, you would revere in hushed tones. And then to see that with this rock and roll was like, whoa, it just spun everything on its ear. And that was just, I don't know how he came up with that riff. I actually have no idea, but it's one that's just lasted forever and it's so good.
It is. Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Well, Michael Jackson, the album had already been out for like a year and he decided, oh, I know the story. It had been number one and then it started to fall out of the number one spot. And Michael didn't like that. And he was like, I got to do something. I want to do something major. And he decided that he would work with this director, John Landis, and they were going to make this outlandish video. Michael paid for a lot of that video because no record company was going to come up with that kind of money. And they came up with this whole scenario, the whole Thriller scenario. The song was written by Rod Temperton, who wrote so many, wrote Off the Wall and Rock With You. And they decided to make this whole video. And when it had its premiere on MTV, we just played it like nonstop. And it was what it did was it really showed that the videos were like mini movies because that's how he treated it. He was like, hey, you know what? These don't have to be 3 minutes. We can really, why does that have to be? Let's make it a little movie. And he was the first guy to do that. After a while, David Bowie did that with Blue Jean. But that was Michael who said, hey, you know what? Let me shoehorn this into, he was really good at that, into, more, let me get more into this. To that point, if you see Michael, 1993, playing the Super Bowl, Michael did the most amazing thing I've ever seen anybody do. He came out on the Super Bowl, popped up from the stage, right? And they strike a chord, he jumps up, he takes the stage, right? He turns, he's standing like this. You're starting to get a little antsy, right? For over a minute. I've heard it said that that's like $15 million worth of advertising time. He stood there for a minute. Can you imagine how much like a boss that is? And then he turns to the other side and he does another 30 seconds. The crowd is going wild. The band was like, because Michael had said, don't start playing. I'm going to flick my wrist when I'm going to feel it. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to feel it. And so they're all like, is he insane? Is he crazy? This is the Super Bowl. Oh my God. And finally he flicks his wrist and they start playing. But that was Michael. He was like, I'm going to make this a bigger moment. Most people would just jump out, they'd turn and they'd start. I'm going to make this an even bigger moment than anyone ever has. And that's what he did with Thriller. And you watch it today and it's still that. Yeah. And the album, by the way, went back up into number one.
Of course, yeah. Also early on, there was a kind of there was an outcry. There was a reluctance to feature Black artists on MTV. Is that true?
I don't subscribe to that theory. Again, I'm not one of the programmers, but I am. My thought about that is that I had come to MTV from my college radio station. And on my college radio station, I did a show called Getaway, which was all urban music. I also did a show called Just Plain Folk, which was all folk music. And I also did a show, because there wasn't that many DJs there, I also did a show called The Afternoon Show, which was all 80s new wave. So the idea of formatting was very common. It didn't seem unusual at all. I would no more play Shalimar and Just Plain Folk than I would have played Steve Goodman in my Getaway show because, it was different formats. I mean, when you look at the Grammy Awards, There's best rock song, best country song, best R&B song. I mean, the idea of formatting is so commonplace. So it didn't seem unusual to me at all. And I remember seeing Michael's, you know, and again, I'm somebody who came to MTV from an urban radio background. And when I saw Michael's Billie Jean, I remember seeing it going, oh my gosh, man, this is so good. And I totally understood. And just to me, in my mind, I wonder if we're going to be able to play this because it just wasn't our format. We were WNEW. We were, you know, we were in the, you know, if we were the Grammy Awards, you know, best rock album category. And I think what happened is, this is my take on it. Everybody's going to say something different, but this is my take on it, is Michael changed the trajectory of MTV because it was such, Billie Jean was such an irresistible video. And I know I've heard all these stories subsequently about, oh, CBS. And again, if that happened, I wasn't aware of it. My perception at the time was that it was too good to pass up. It was too good. Plus, Michael had done the Motown Music Awards, and his performance was just like, anybody could see that his performance was just like, just breathtaking, just like, oh my gosh. And my humble opinion is that it was too, we couldn't not play it. I know there's some executives who are in my camp and some executives who are in different camps, but this is my memory of what happened. And I remember when we started playing it, I was like, oh, thank God. I'm so glad because, you know, I was already in that world. So I was very happy to see that that was included. And people will say, oh, you know, this, that, or the other thing. My Martha Quinn stance is that Michael changed the trajectory of MTV.
That's a great answer. Let's go to 1983. Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun.
Well, Cyndi was so great in the 80s in that she was, when I was saying that Boy George said that the 80s was pre-stylist, the 80s was also very much vintage. Like, okay, like you look at anything that the Stray Cats were all about, you know, the 50s and vintage. I remember interviewing Mark Knopfler of the Dire Straits in like some kind of almost like an I Love Lucy dress. It was pink and black and it had little disc-like vinyl on it. And that there was very much of a 50s love, you know, Happy Days was big, and vintage stores, secondhand stores were really, really popular. So she was very much of that look. You know, we would just go to Screaming Mimi's or, you know, any of the vintage stores around, you know, Greenwich Village. I mean, I had tons of clothes that I was wearing on MTV from secondhand stores. And what I loved about Cyndi is she had that knack of hitting critical mass. She would just put lots and lots and lots of stuff on. And what's amazing to me about Cyndi is you listen to that debut album and you listen to all the songs on there, like Money Changes Everything, let's just say. And her vocals are so confident and so huge and so profound. And you go, oh my God, this is her debut album. I would love to know what like the engineers in the studio were thinking when she opened her mouth and she started singing, because, you know, she comes in and she's like, you know, kind of wacky, and you could see how she could be dismissed. But then when she opens her mouth and started singing, I've got to imagine that everybody in the studio was just going, you know, like, oh my God, this is incredible. What a talent. What a talent. Probably the best female singer from the 80s. I mean, there are a lot of really good ones like, you know, Ann Wilson. Well, that's a tough one between those two. But Cyndi was just, you know, wow.
What about Madonna and Material Girl, that video?
The Material Girl video is so funny because she said in retrospect that was a joke. She meant that to be a joke, that was tongue in cheek, that's really so not her, that she's not a material girl. And we've seen her recently, building schools in Africa. And, Madonna does have a really true sense of her heart and what her heart is all about. So, that she's been known as the Material Girl. I will say that it was on the set of that video that she met Sean Penn. So I'm sure that in some regards that she's happy that it all went down that way. But, that's when Madonna started to embody the Madonna, even though Madonna says that she was always Madonna, which is probably true, but she became Madonna as second, almost channeling Marilyn, and that sort of transformed her personality beyond, this spunky New York urban singer to this. She's a superstar. She is a superstar.
Particularly in video, I mean, that you're seeing these artists in that way.
Yes, very, very true. Before that, you would have to sort of hungrily read through Rolling Stone or Teen Beat or magazines, or wait to see them on Midnight Special or something to see, analyze what are they wearing. But now to be able to see them up close and over, there is one thing though, that with MTV, as opposed to the way we consume music now on YouTube, you can just pull up whatever you want anytime you want. But you had to literally sit and wait. Janet Jackson has talked about just having to sit and wait. You could, like if your favorite video wasn't on, if you wanted to see Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer and it wasn't next, you'd be like, okay, I'll just wait for one more. Okay, I'll just wait for one more. Okay, I'll just wait for one more. You just wanted to see, shout out Blotto, I Want to Be a Lifeguard, because let's not forget, they were one of the early videos on MTV. And, you guys, I always have your back because they were from Albany, New York, and that was a great video.
Wow. One last one. Aha, Take on Me.
What can I say? How to sum up Aha's Take on Me? It was such a groundbreaking video. And I think it's still, you watch that today and it's still cutting edge. The whole thing with the combination between the newspapers and the guys. And have you ever seen the literal video of Aha's Take on Me? It's just really funny. They say like, sketchy hand grabs a lead pipe. Excuse my singing, but it's just really funny how they do it. But, at that time, not only was, the guys on Aha were great singers and, really adorable. But that video was just like, you honestly can't see that video enough. Even now, there's videos like that. Like, Aha's Take on Me is a great example. Sledgehammer, I think, as well. And for me, going back, I almost like it as much for its minimalist approach is Van Halen's Jump. I love that video. I can't see it enough. And I think that's one of the videos that they kind of took the Michael Jackson approach, which was, we're going to take this moment and make it all about us. And they just, it was like, so we're going to just shoehorn in every aspect of our personality into this video. And it was stark and it was raw and it was rock and it was charming and it was sexy and it was, adorable, it just was everything that's Van Halen. And it's just like everything that was great about the rock and roll era of that time, pre-dark. It was still rock and roll when rock and roll was almost like operatic and classical in its ebullience. You listen to Twisted Sister, We're Not Gonna Take It. And that is ebullient. At that time it seemed like badass. But now that you think about it, you go, wow, that was so like classical music, that was so big and larger than life. You could see why it became a Broadway show, Rock of Ages, all that music, because it really was like that. It was big and larger than life and celebratory.
Yeah, and they hold up too. There's so many of
I
them.
think
You
so.
can watch them now and you can't even barely watch them.
But I don't know if that's just us. But I feel like it holds up. I think there's so many songs from the MTV generation, that hold up, like Tainted Love, Soft Cell, or whatever, Joan Jett, I Love Rock and Roll. There's so many.
Are there acts that you think never would have been stars without MTV?
It's so impossible to tell, because I think that people who are meant to be stars are going to be stars. You could see a kid walking down the street and you can go, that kid's got it. There's a little kid that calls me on my radio show every week and he's got corny jokes. And it's like, oh, this kid Edison, I don't know what he's going to do, but he's going to do something. I think that there's people who will see what's available as far as promotion goes, and they will be there and they will be doing it. They will be tap dancing. They will be playing their guitar. They will be giving their monologue. They will be dancing on cardboard on the sidewalk. There are people who will be out there and doing whatever it is that they need to do to be heard, because that's just seems to be a genetic thing for some people.
Yeah. What about the fact that for MTV now you had musicians that had to make videos, and not everyone could do that. Do you think that impacted the industry as to who really rose to the top?
I I honestly don't. I'm not a musician, so I'm not a good person to answer that. But I think that you could be who you were in videos. Like my fave Van Halen, like, Eddie Van Halen might have been the first guy to say, or Alex Van Halen to say, oh, I'm not going to do that. Well, okay, what if you were just you playing your awesome guitar solo, or like the guys in ZZ Top, they were saying, oh, we don't want to make videos. Okay, well, what if you're just playing your instruments and then we have this other scenario going on alongside you? I think there's always a workaround to express who you are. I think the people who maybe said that it wasn't for them and that cost them their career, I know so many people, separate subject, but like, for example, songwriters or singers who are so talented, and you go, why didn't they go farther? I'm sure we all know people like that, and there's this reason or that reason, but maybe it's just what we were talking about before, is the people who are determined to make what's available work for them. They are going to be those people.
And how did and once it all really started, and now you saw companies really getting invested into the music videos. How did that change the music videos themselves?
Can
now
you
that
clarify your question?
That money was starting to flow in as the
That's a
industry came
good
in.
news, bad news situation, because like you look back at some of the early missing persons videos, and Dale Bozio had taken some plastic bowls and tubing from the pet store, and fishing tubing, like you would send the oxygen into your fish tank.
Those clear ones?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And she like would make these little outfits for herself and like make her little vinyl skirts, and their videos were on videotape and obviously done in some studio, like who knows where. And there's such a charm to that. And then, the videos got more expensive or more produced, and that's all well and good. Janet Jackson's Escapade video, let's say, for example. I mean, it's a beautiful video and it's so beautifully produced, and I love it. But there's part of me that does miss those days of fish tubing as costumes and just, taking the video camera in some little dirty little studio somewhere with a green screen. I think there's good and bad to both. I love the grit from the early days, but of course, for the entertainment value, it definitely changed, with the money, as it always does. But is that always better? I'm not sure. I mean, look at the movie Spinal Tap, one of my favorite movies. That was made on a shoestring budget. I don't know. Is that better than Star Wars? Is it worse than Star Wars? Or the early Star Wars versus the later Star Wars? I personally tend to go for the shoestring budget productions more than the bigger ones, but other people are different. So I think it all just depends.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your interactions with the artists themselves. You said you wanted to possibly be a journalist early on.
Yeah.
And talk about the first artist that you started to deal with and interview.
Well, it was very odd because when I started MTV, I was a college DJ, and like Daryl Hall and John Oates had the Voices album, which was huge. Everyone knew, You Make My Dreams Come True and Kiss on My List. And, those songs are already very much a part of our vernacular as just, not to mention Rich Girl and Sarah Smile. And so when I first got there, they say, hey, we've got your first interview, and it's Daryl Hall and John Oates. Now, the biggest interview I had done prior to that was I somehow got an interview with Steve Goodman, who wrote City of New Orleans, back because I was doing the folk show. And I don't remember what happened, but it didn't go down well at all. Like, I think he got mad and he left. He was at our little college radio station, and I was like, well, I'm not very good at interviewing. So they said, oh, it's Daryl Hall and John Oates. And I was like, do you think maybe I should have like an intro artist first? Like maybe that's not such a good idea for me to start with them. And they're like, no, it'll be fine. And I don't remember anything about the interview, but I do remember, John Oates and I have sort of stayed in touch, and we laugh about that now. Like, they were like, wow, who is this kid? And I was like, oh my God. So I have thanked them many times for being so kind. Rick Springfield says that his first impression of MTV, I did an event with him not that long ago where somebody said, what was your first impression of MTV? And he said, well, actually, it was Martha. I walked into this weird little studio in God knows where in Manhattan. My record company said I should go do it, and I see this 12-year-old sitting there waiting to talk to me. And he was like, I don't know what this is, but this can't be going well. And you know, it's just funny now. All these years later, we can laugh about it. He actually lives down the street.
Oh, what about Bob Dylan? You interviewed him on the show.
Yeah, he was, you know, when he finally decided that he was going to do videos, and somehow we got an interview with Bob Dylan, but what he, you know, everything is on Bob time, and what he wanted to do was do it in London, backstage at Wembley Arena. And so we flew to London, and I luckily, you know, I deep dived into Bob Dylan. I mean, everybody knew you know, Blowin' in the Wind and stuff like that, but I wasn't like a Bob Dylan aficionado. But I quickly learned a lot about Bob Dylan. And everybody was saying, oh, you're nervous, he's so mean, you know, to interviewers. And I wasn't, good thing, I wasn't really aware of that. So I just kind of waltzed in, and he seemed totally charming. I thought he was super nice. He was nicer than I ever imagined. But even walking in, people were like, hey, did you ever see that movie Don't Look Back? He just eats journalists for lunch. I was like, oh man, no, I haven't seen that. I'm kind of glad that I haven't. But yeah, so that was definitely one of the highlights of my musical career. And then he invited me to fly to London and backstage to interview him we flew to Ireland, and backstage to interview him was a young journalist/musician named Bono. And so there's a picture of me and Bob Dylan and Bono, which I believe is the first time that Bob and Bono have ever been photographed together. And Bob had said, hey, Martha, come over here. And so I'm, you know, in the middle of his first ever photograph between him and Bono, because Bono wasn't Bono at that time. You know, he was, you know, this new musician. You know, he's popular in Ireland, but the rest of the world didn't really know Bono so well.
Well, how did you prepare for these interviews?
Well, just studiously, just darn studiously. CBS sent me every Bob Dylan record, which I listened to, and just got my, you know, read up everything that I could, and you know, just darn studiously.
Is that how you approached most of the interviews you did?
Yeah, pretty much, you know, just reading everything I could, every, you know, Billboard magazine. And again, this is pre-internet, so it was a little harder. It was like literally going to, you know, the bookstore, or getting, you know, back then you'd like call the record company and say, please send me every bio you have, please send me every press clipping you have. You know, you just beg the press person at the record company to please send me everything. You know, that was, you know, studiously is the best. Just like you know, that's the best way I can say I prepared for it.
You also interviewed David Lee Roth.
Oh yeah, that was the best. You know, I often say that East Coast and West Coast. East Coast was Van Halen, Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult. West Coast was more, you know, Depeche Mode, you know, much New Order, much more new wave. Oingo Boingo was happening on the West Coast, but East Coast was all, especially where I grew up in Westchester County, it was all like heavy metal. It was all Blue Oyster Cult, Black Sabbath, and Earth, Wind & Fire. Those were the two like big camps where I grew up. So, you know, to interview David Lee Roth from Van Halen was just like, oh my God, this is, you know, crazy. I can't believe I'm doing this. This is the greatest thing ever. All I could think about was everybody from my high school when I was sitting there talking to David Lee Roth.
How'd it go?
It went amazing. Dave is so great. What I didn't know at the time is that Dave is so brilliant at being Dave. Just wind him up and let him go. What I was intent on, my purpose, my goal, was to crack the veneer that is David Lee Roth and get to his soul and have him reveal to me who he really was. This was me, you know, 23 years old. Don't forget, I'm the same person who, as a college intern, I asked the program director why I wasn't choosing the records. I was like, I'm going to get to the core of who this guy is, not even knowing that, oh my God, this guy's been doing what he's been doing for so long. But so, yeah, I was so serious. Like, if you look at me, he'll be like saying, you know, whatever he's saying, you know, oh, you put the Van Halen records next to all the other records and it's going to melt your entire collection. And you look at me and I'm like being really serious. Like, okay, I'm not going to fall for you. I'm not going to fall for your charm. But of course, eventually I did. But then I soon learned, don't do it that way. Don't fight it. Let it go, because that's the beauty of Dave. But I didn't realize that at the time. But even still, it was a pretty good interview. I did, I always did good interviews with him because I was really prepared, back to that studious thing. And also I was such a huge Van Halen fan that, and he could talk to, I mean, honestly, my glasses could interview David Lee Roth, because he had this whole theory of let them ask what they want to ask, and you say whatever it is that you want to say. So David could give a good interview to anybody, get across what he wanted to get across, because he knew just what he wanted to do and the image that he wanted to portray, no matter who was sitting there.
So when you were interviewing, did you ever feel that you did get that core that
Of David Lee Roth?
Or anyone when you were interviewing?
Well, I'll tell you one thing about David Lee Roth is, not that first interview, but another interview that he did, I asked him something about, does he have a girlfriend or a significant other, somebody, I forget exactly what my question was, but he told me that he'd actually never been in love, but he'd hoped to one day. And that kind of zipped past me. You're nervous and you're looking at your notes, but later I watched that and I go, oh my God, that probably was the most real that I've ever seen Dave be with me, and maybe with anybody, because that was a very real moment. But when I thought that I got to the sticky gooey core of who Dave really was an event that happened at the very first Video Music Awards. They told him, it was at Radio City Music Hall. Everybody in the music business was there. And they told me to go out and sort of warm up the crowd. This was the cameras. And I had these little heels, and the deal was I was going to go out and say blah, 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 and let the show begin. And there was a proscenium that was going to lower, and I was going to lower on the proscenium. So I go out, I say my thing, I look out, I see Paul Schaefer and Paul Stanley and, all kinds of people, sitting there, and forget who was in the front row. I saw Dave there, but basically anybody who's anybody in the music business was there. So I go and do my thing. I go, okay, let the show begin. I'm standing there and nothing happens. And I'm like, oh no, what do I do? So I'm standing there for a second and I think, okay, well, I better just turn and walk off. So at some point, I'm walking towards the end of the proscenium, and I'm about here, and it decides to start lowering. But now I'm teetering on the edge. I'm heading down to the orchestra pit, and I can either fall down into the orchestra pit, or I could take a little leap and go onto the main lip of the stage. So I decide, I'm on the edge here. I'm going to take a little leap and get back onto the main stage. And I take my little leap, but I was in heels, and I fell. And I was oh my God. First of all, you're in your early 20s, and I just died a million deaths. Plus, at that time, you're not cool at all. At least I wasn't cool at all. And anybody throughout the night, even if they hadn't seen it, my first words were, oh my God, did you see me fall? Oh my God, did you see me fall? I was so mortified. And they sent me out to interview David Lee Roth. And of course, the first words I say to him, oh my God, did you see me fall? And he goes, darling, you're going to love this. He goes, welcome to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Those were his words. And he said, you know how many times I've done that? Don't even worry about it. And in that moment, I did get a sense of his true humanity, because he just picked me up, he pieced me together, and he made me feel so okay, and that's rock and roll, and you know how many times I've done that. And I was so grateful to him, because he really made me feel so much better. And I still always remember that, and I'm always in Camp Dave, because I know that he's super kind at heart.
What a great moment.
Yeah, welcome to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Going full circle from your childhood, you also interviewed Paul McCartney.
I did interview Paul McCartney, and gosh darn do I wish that I had pictures or something. This was pre-iPhone. But my husband was with me, and he's a big Beatle fan too, and we went to Capitol Records and we interviewed Paul McCartney, and Linda was there, and by that time I was a vegetarian, and so we totally bonded over that. And he, so many times with the really big celebrities, they've done it so many times, and they know that being kind to that super nervous person in front of them is the right thing to do. And he was just so lovely. And I do at least have his autograph. And I do have, we were doing the interview and he was sitting like I'm doing. He was drinking tea. And so he gets up and he leaves, and I got an autograph, and my husband got an autograph, and Linda gave us an autograph. And he left, and I looked down at where he had been sitting, and I saw his teacup. And I looked in, and there was still some tea in there with milk, I remember. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't care if I get a bacterial infection. If I get it from Paul McCartney, it's all good. So I just picked up the cup, and I drank the tea. And then I was just looking around, Capitol Studios, the famous round building, and nobody's particularly looking at me. And I was like, okay, cool. I should open my bag. And I put the teacup right in my bag because I thought, if you're going to do something sneaky, just do it right out in the open. And then I was like, cool. I'm going to pick up the spoon. I put it right in. I picked up the saucer. I put it right in my bag. I've got it all inside the house. And I guess you could say, since I haven't washed it, if there's an emergency and we need to clone Paul McCartney, let me know because, except his DNA is now merged with mine. So it would be our child because I drank the tea. So I did drink Paul McCartney's tea.
That's pretty good. So were people pretty generally open to you in terms of?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, anytime you have a camera on you, you're going to be a lot more open. But Boy George, I did the first interview with Boy George, who I saw not that long ago. And, it's just so funny nowadays, having gone through so many years. It's almost like we were in the same high school, all of us together, those early MTV years. There's such a bond. I was talking to Adam Ant not that long ago, and I don't even remember now if we ever met back then, but it's like we had. And I said the same thing to him, that it's like we were all in the same high school. And he was saying, it's so true. There are those of us who were in those early trenches of the early MTV years, and to all still be together and reconnecting. And it's, time has gone on to where people don't really remember if they ever actually met. I was talking to David Coverdale from Whitesnake, and I couldn't actually remember if I'd ever talked to him before. And I said, hey, David, when's the last time I saw you? I was like floating it out there. And he goes, oh, Martha, we met on a sweaty dance floor in New York City at 2 a.m. And I thought to myself, okay, he doesn't remember either. Then we just continued. But it's like we did because we all sort of were of that same class.
Did you have any bad interview experiences?
I'm sure I did, but I'm trying to remember. Oh, well, I've talked about this so many times that when I first interviewed the Romantics, I don't know what they were thinking. It was just some kind of crazy thing. We had all been at a party the night before. It was a record release party. I feel like it was a Billy Squier record release party. I don't know why I think that, but I was there with Nina Blackwood and the Romantics were there, and I guess I said hello to them. I don't particularly remember. But then the next day, they came into the MTV studios. And I'm sitting there, and, as I said, I always prepared for my interviews really studiously, and I was always, very aware that I was, doing this job for MTV, and I wanted to, do a good job for them. And for some reason, one of the guys goes, well, Wally, and he totally strangely goes, the guy you had sex with, and I was like, whoa, where did that come from? And in my head, I was thinking, oh no, MTV is going to be so upset with me because this is all going awry and I don't know what to do, and I know they want to get this interview, and I just sort of kept going, and I just kind of didn't talk to him anymore. Afterwards, I thought to myself, I wish I had stood up and torn off my microphone and said, this interview is over. And to their credit, one of the MTV executives called me and said afterwards, you don't have to take that. And I was like, I didn't know what to do. And I recently saw the Romantics, and I was waiting to see what it would be like to see them because, actually, before this, a couple of years ago, at Brian Setzer's ex-wife's house, she had a party, and one of the Romantics was there, and I saw him across the room, and I saw him see me, and I said to my husband, oh my God, there's one of the Romantics over there. And he did come up to me, and he did apologize. And I was like, yeah, that was such a weird move, why would you do that, And he said, I don't know, I'm sorry. It wasn't him that said it. So then I was doing this gig with the Romantics not that long ago, and that guy is no longer in the band, the one who I'd already kind of buried the hatchet with. And somebody said, well, maybe they won't even remember. And I was like, oh, they'll remember. They'll remember all right. I can't wait to see how this goes down. And the second I saw them, I didn't care anymore. All this time, I've been carrying this, oh, when I see the Romantics, I'm going to say something. I'm going to say, what are you guys thinking? And I saw them, and I just did not even care. I was like, hey, you guys, how you doing? It's so great to see you. It's been so many years. You're here. I'm here. We're survivors. You guys are still rocking. That's awesome. And I honestly did not even care. I didn't even bring it up.
And they didn't
Isn't
either?
that funny?
And they didn't
I think
bring
they
it.
didn't remember. I think they did. And that same night, when John Smith of New Shoes, it's Valerie Day and John Smith, he came up to me and he apologized for something that he had said. And I didn't remember. I didn't remember at all. It made no impression on me. And he was like, I'm so sorry. I've been wanting to say this to you. You know, you asked me something and I said that was a stupid question. And I did say, well, why was that a stupid question? That seemed like the way he related to me. I said, that seemed like an okay question. He was like, I don't know. And I was like, don't even worry about it. We've all been there. Don't even worry about it. And the truth is, I didn't even remember it. So, you know, something that you could be thinking about for so long, like, I want to apologize. I want to say I feel so bad. Like, I hadn't even thought about it since that day, but he'd been thinking about it all this time. I don't know what the moral to that story is, but I guess it's just, you know, we just all love each other, so don't even worry about it.
I want my MTV campaign. We had touched on it before.
Well, that was such a great idea of Bob Pittman's. I was saying earlier, you can never go wrong betting on Bob Pittman. You know, MTV was having trouble getting into cable markets because we wanted to be free, and they preferred, you know, services like HBO, which were, you know, subscription and people paid money, but, you know, kids don't have money. We wanted to be on the free tier. And so, and plus we were 24/7, and a lot of cable systems were like only 12 hours, or, you know, it was kind of a weird, you know, cable wasn't what it is today. So, you know, we were we're having trouble making this be a go, and we decided, okay, we need to do this campaign. It was, I want my MTV. Call your local cable company and demand your MTV. Well, when it started to run, people were calling their local cable company and demanding their MTV. Now, this was a really bold move because we needed these cable companies to like us and want to carry us. Well, they called and said, you've got to stop these ads. We can't handle these phone calls. You've got to stop these ads. So Bob Pittman did the most genius thing I've ever heard of anybody doing. He said, increase the ads. And guess what? That was a huge gamble because they could have said, okay, you know what, you guys are off our, oh yeah, you want to play that way? We're never adding you. But it paid off in a really big way. So I just love that story because sometimes you just gotta say, you just gotta look convention in the eye. Like, I would never have the nerve to do this, but Bob said, buy more. And I just think that is the coolest story, and it is so rock and roll.
Yeah, and it had so much impact.
So much impact. You know, that's when, you know, because those ads really put MTV on the map before MTV was in a lot of these areas. And I mentioned earlier that that's when I could finally say, that's where I work. And even, you know, my parents who, you know, oh, what's Martha doing? Now they could say, instead of, I don't know, she's working on this weird cable thing. And as I was saying earlier, cable meant, is she going to have her clothes on? You know that thing where Mick Jagger, you know, the Rolling Stones, he's saying, you know, I want my MTV. That's where my daughter works. So that's really made us legitimate.
How did you handle the fame? You know, now you're a recognizable celebrity as you're going through.
I don't know exactly. I'll have to think about that. You know, everybody had a different style. J.J. Jackson would come into work and he would be like, oh my God, I just got mobbed on the street. I could barely make it into the studio. But J.J. would walk down the street with his, you know, giant full-length rabbit fur coat, his mirrored sunglasses, his 200-pound, Akita at his side, his, red cowboy boots and his purple leather pants. And it's like, oh, you're kidding. People recognized you? No. Me, I'd come in with my NYU sweatpants and my Pee Wee Herman t-shirt, plus I'm very tiny and I'd be sitting on the subway. I never had that problem like people mobbing me like I was Elvis Presley. So I think that everybody handles it differently. I do think that as time went on, I took my Martha Quinn-ness for granted, and ultimately I learned a really good lesson: never take anything for granted in show business, never ever.
What does that mean, that you took it for granted?
Well, I thought that MTV and I, much like maybe your high school boyfriend, you think you're gonna, I'll always be with my high school boyfriend or whatever. I thought that I would always be with MTV, always, always. MTV and I were just, one and the same. But when Bob Pittman left and the new regime came in, they decided, as often new regimes will do, they're going to let go of the old, signature pieces of the old regime. And MTV, there was a period of time in the 80s when I wasn't on MTV, I got let go. And I was shocked to the core because I thought that would never happen to me. But if I go back and I watch some of the footage from like 1985 MTV, I watch it and I go, I can see that I was taking that for granted. I can see that I was cocky and resting on my laurels. And, when eventually they brought me back, like I was off for maybe a year and they brought me back, and oh boy, I did not take it for granted. And that's a lesson that I learned. And life has a good way of teaching you. Life has a good way of teaching you. That's all I could say. Everybody learns these lessons, and that's a good one that I learned.
Once when they didn't renew you, what were you going to do? I mean, did you?
I had no idea. I felt like the floor dropped out from underneath me. I did not know what I was going to do. I just moved into a penthouse apartment in New York City because I was like, oh, I'll just always have this job. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay my rent? I don't know what to do. But luckily, I had met my husband who lived in Los Angeles. So I pretty quickly, like within weeks, I moved to Los Angeles and moved in with my husband. And we've now been married 25 years. So it actually worked out really well. I flew out with Bob Pittman because the two of us sort of ceremoniously left together. And my husband picked me up at the airport. So it's all kind of funny how it all works out. And then, lo and behold, many, many years later, Bob Pittman called me up and said, did I want to be on this cool 80s radio station? So it's so funny. Once again, Bob Pittman plunked me down into the world of Duran Duran and Aha. And, I had been doing 80s, but on Sirius XM, and this is just a whole new world of terrestrial radio that Bob brought me aboard. So it's just it's just funny how, that came back, my Bob Pittman connection.
Fantastic. You had mentioned that you were at the first MTV Music Awards, but what was the initial reasoning behind starting the awards? Do you know?
Well, I guess they just were like, okay, what can we do? They were all about what can we do? What can we do to brand ourselves? And it was also, once MTV became, it was no longer will people watch videos over and over, because that was the big question. Who's going to watch these videos over and over? I didn't know who was going to watch these videos over and over until you saw it, until you saw MTV in action and you go, oh my gosh, this is actually strangely really, really addicting. So that question was behind us. By 1984, Thriller had already been on, Billie Jean had already been on. MTV was pretty established as, people really like it. People are really rabid for it. And it really made MTV, it's one of the things that made MTV go from being a young upstart to being a real corporate entity and making video music really legit. And I was thinking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and thinking about those first MTV Video Music Awards really led the way, perhaps maybe even for you guys, in that, okay, back then, rock and roll wasn't its own award ceremony. It was, the the Grammy Awards would be like, Luciano Pavarotti and Dolly Parton and the Police would all receive Grammy Awards the same night. It was all just a big mishmash. Once the MTV Video Music Awards came along, it was like, okay, wait a second. We can compartmentalize this youth culture as its own entity. And, if you think about it, back in the day, when kids were going to buy jeans or clothes, you would go to the youth department at Macy's or Gimbel's or wherever. And then all of a sudden, Chess King, Contempo Casual, stores that were just for, the young teen attitude came about. We weren't left to, scraping for our look in secondhand stores. There were stores that were catering to this new generation of a mindset. And with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you guys, legitimize and are an edifice to this youth pop culture that I really think MTV paved the way towards making it, we can look at this as its own entity.
Oh, that's really interesting. Were there any specific moments from the awards that really resonated with you?
Oh, from the Video Music Awards? I can tell you that one year, I guess it was 1985, the dress that I was wearing, do you know about this? The dress that I was wearing in the 1985 Video Music Awards had been given to me by Tina Turner because she had come in for an interview and I complimented her on the red lace dress that she wore in the Private Dancer video. And maybe 3 weeks later, I get a package at the MTV studios from Tina Turner. I guess it was from her manager, Roger Davies. And I was like, oh, this is weird. But I was thinking, she sent me a T-shirt or something. And I opened it and I remember just opening the envelope and just seeing a little bit of that red lace. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I pulled it out and she had sent me that dress. And I'm so mad at myself that I didn't save the envelope. I didn't save the letter. I'm just like, that's cool. Tina Turner sent me a letter. Well, I know. I'm sorry. I know. Look, what can I say? Youth is wasted on the young. So that dress I wore to the Video Music Awards and I had it for years and it was just sitting in my closet and I was feeling like this is a crime. This is a beautiful dress. It was Tina's. It was in the Private Dancer video. And I sent it to you guys, so you have it somewhere. I hope you still have it.
We absolutely do.
Okay, good.
I love it that you're telling the story on camera. That's really cool.
I wish I still had that letter, but I promise you that's the dress, and you can see it in her video.
Yeah, you have to come by and see it again.
Yeah, I'd love to, actually.
A few more MTV things. I'm not going to don't want to torture you too much. You had a show called MTV Prime with Martha Quinn.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
That's my second incarnation. I have like my first incarnation and my second incarnation. I'll tell you one thing that happened with my second incarnation when I came back. There's something about life kicking you around. I mean, when I was off MTV, that first time, I was taking it totally for granted. I was spending tons of money. I've heard John Oates, and I'm telling you this story as a way to make me feel better. John Oates in his book talks about how, after the heyday of Hall & Oates, there was a period of time when he was in Aspen and he had like $50 because, managers and business managers and, he'd made a lot of bad decisions and he didn't have that much money after a while. And that made me feel better because, when I moved to LA, I didn't have very much money and I was on unemployment and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And, when I went back, what I noticed was when I went back in my second incarnation is I definitely got, first of all, I never took my job for granted. And second of all, I got funnier. And people are always like, when did you get funny? And I would say, well, when life kicks you around, I think that happens. You tend to develop a sense of humor when you've been kicked around a little bit by life. But in my second incarnation, I had the first show that they brought me back was MTV Classic Hits, I believe it was called. And there was a lot of hubbub about, oh my God, in 1987, MTV is already calling 1981 MTV Classic. But still, it was, and we played a lot of the early videos. And then it sort of morphed into MTV Prime with Martha Quinn. And then I went back and, they asked me to move back to New York, but I was already entrenched in LA. So I was flying back and forth. And it was fun, to have the second incarnation. It's kind of like, you have a boy break up with you, and then eventually he calls and says he wants to go back out with you. So it felt really good.
Yeah, and you really started to see that after those years, you started to see a lot of changes in MTV as a whole.
Yeah, I was there. You know, it's interesting. I was there for the first era, and I was there for the transition to the second. I used to joke with Ken Ober, may he rest in peace. I'm so sad that he's passed away, but I used to say that he personally is responsible for ruining MTV because Remote Control was the first non-music programming. And it's interesting. I read somewhere somebody saying MTV created the video star and then MTV killed the radio star. MTV, in fact, killed their own format that they made so successful, but they were always about staying on the cutting edge and always about changing and evolving. And that's the direction that they went, you know, sort of saying, okay, we're done with that format. You know, of course, people always say to me, oh, Martha, I want my MTV back. And I always say, you know what? Even if MTV today was 24/7 videos and they had VJs just like they did, it still wouldn't be Warrant and Winger and Madonna and the Go-Go's. It would be Who's Ever Now. And you'd still be saying the same thing. It was lightning in a bottle. It really was. You can just never recreate that.
That's a great answer. But were you the shows that were being created and that kind of thing? Were you a part of that at all?
No, not really.
No?
I mean, I saw it go down. Like I was friendly with, you know, I was friendly with Ken Ober, and Ben Stiller had a show, and I was kind of friends with him because that was going on at the same time. I didn't quite realize the ramification that it was going to have, that was, because it still kind of seemed like, okay, that's just a one-off. You know, we already had sort of specialty shows like, say, 120 Minutes, where we were just looking at new wave videos, or so it kind of seemed like, okay, well, this is sort of a spin-off, but it didn't. I didn't realize the handwriting on the wall that could only. I don't even think MTV knew. I think they were just like, okay, this is working. Let's do this. Let's do Real World. You know, let's do that. And I think that it's just an evolutionary process. You go, okay, well, you know, what's working? Let's try this. Let's try that. Oh, okay. You know, this is working. We'll follow this path. And that's just where it went.
Okay. Why did you finally leave MTV?
Basically because my phone stopped ringing. You know, at like 1992, they just didn't pick up my contract, and that was the end of that. And, you know, by then, you know, since it was the second time around, I knew when I went back that, you know, it wasn't going to last forever. I knew it. And I was so sure to enjoy every single moment that the sun shone on me that second time, because I knew that it wasn't going to last. When MTV started, J.J. Jackson and Mark Goodman, they were getting copies of every single interview they did, and they were saving them. And I would watch that, and I'd be like, I don't need to get copies of any interviews. For what? I'm going to be here forever. And then the second time around, I was sure to get all my, you know, because then, you know, I didn't realize I hadn't been around the entertainment business. You know, I'm sure, you know, probably Michael J. Fox and Justine Bateman thought Family Ties was going to be on forever, and probably Meredith Baxter Birney knew that eventually she was going to be looking for another job. You know, that's just how it works.
What do you think are your favorite moments from that time?
From MTV, well, definitely the times of, you know, that I got to meet the legendary music stars that I had grown up admiring, like David Lee Roth, like Bob Dylan, like I wish that I had met Michael Jackson, but like meeting Prince. I'm actually shocked, to be honest with you. I watched some footage of me with Prince, and I'd been a Prince fan since before MTV, since, you know, the controversy days. And, you know, he says, I said, how do you feel? And he goes, I feel with my hands, Martha, because he was a pretty funny guy. And I said right away, I go, oh, would you like to give me a demonstration? And I was like, watching that now in hindsight, I go, wow, that's pretty quick of me. that's pretty quick thinking on my part. But you know, meeting all of those people, that was really amazing. And you know, the family that has been created with the VJs and all the people that were there on the ground floor of MTV, I'm so grateful for. And I'm grateful too for the people across the country. I hear about this all the time. You know, when MTV went into small markets around the country, and people were, you know, there's always people, like I was saying to you before, oh, there's always people who, if they're going to be stars, they're going to be stars. Well, there are always people who, if they're going to think independently and outside the box, they're going to think independently and outside the box, whether they're supported or not. And a lot of times those people, when they're not supported, you know, that's a sad and lonely and disenfranchising experience. But for those people, when they could tune into MTV and see other people who are thinking independently and outside the box, like a Boy George, for example, all of a sudden it's like, I'm not alone. And that is the best feeling in the world. I don't care who you are, to feel like you're not alone. And that was such a tremendous gift to an entire generation of independent thinkers. And I'm very, very grateful for that.
What do you think is the power of television?
I think it's just exactly that. The power of television is that you could tune in and see people who you could relate to. I go back and I watch Leave It to Beaver episodes because my son got into Leave It to Beaver for a while. And you see Ward Cleaver talking about how his dad would take off his belt. And you go, wow, that probably was really, really impactful to people watching that who also had maybe a rough childhood. And even in the world of Leave It to Beaver, that they acknowledged that, I guarantee you that made people feel, okay, I feel better. It's not just me. I feel less alone. And maybe I can be like Ward Cleaver and go on to have a really stable, positive family life, even though I came from a rough background. So I think a lot of times you can see situations where you can see yourself and get inspiration from that. And I think that's a real gift.
That is. And what about
I bet you didn't think this was going to morph into a Leave It to Beaver discussion, did you?
No, I did not. But turning that over again, what about the power of rock and roll and music?
In The School of Rock, which is one of my favorite movies, Jack Black says one rock and roll show can change the world. And in the early days of MTV, and I've asked this so many times to our 80s artists, why do you think the 80s has such staying power? Because it does. And Tommy Two-Tone, Mr. 8675309, said something so impactful to me. He said, back then, we thought we could change the world. And you could hear that in the music. It's that ebullience. It's that we are strong. We're going to make our voices heard. And it still was with that optimism of we can make a difference. I feel like when grunge came along, people were still wanting to make their voices heard, but it was with more of a defeatist attitude, more of a we're just screwed attitude. And you can see it in the style. The 80s was big, bright, look at Twisted Sister with the makeup and the, just the, excuse my expression, but the balls to the wall, visual expression, musical expression. And I think that was fueled by an optimism. And keep in mind, this is during the Cold War. This is when Prince was writing, we could all die any day. Party Like It's 1999 is really kind of a hysterical joie de vivre because, thinking about the bomb could be dropped at any time. So I think that there was this kind of, hey, wait, we know what to do. We can change the world. And it's so interesting to me that when the Berlin Wall came down, which was a huge moment politically, suddenly that's when the shoulder pads shrunk, the hair came down, and it's like Kurt Cobain single-handedly. I'm sorry, grunge people, but he came along and kind of made everybody feel stupid for their big hair and their shoulder pads and their bright-colored spandex. And I don't think we've been able to shake that yet. Everybody went, oh, yeah, we better cut our hair and we better, pare it down and we better just wear flannel shirts and go back to jeans. And, the 80s was such a unique time of expression. The music was expressing that optimism that we felt. And, honestly, in the 80s, when you look at Live Aid, which was maybe the ultimate arc of rock and roll, and I think that Queen's performance that day was maybe the apex of that which was started by Elvis Presley. When you see how Freddie Mercury and how Queen performed and how Freddie had, the world in his hand, and it was all about rock and roll, and it was all about changing the world, and it was all about that philanthropic, for the good of the world. It was give peace a chance on steroids, on steroids, on steroids. That's what the rock and roll generation was all about. And that's the power. We really did change the world. We really, really did. And maybe I feel like that was the tippy top, and maybe just the power. Other forms of music came along. There's other ebbs and flows, but for the life of rock and roll, I think maybe that was the absolute pinnacle that day.
And you were there, right?
I was there, and it was amazing. It was an amazing day. It was an incredible day of watching Led Zeppelin and, Bob Dylan and, Madonna, the new people up against the old people, Joan Baez starting the whole thing. It was really just an amazing day, and everybody's so infused with, we are doing the right thing.
It's terrific.
Yeah.